Let's jump right into Rachel Weiss. I want to talk about the Rabbi Rachel Weiss with you. So, yeah, I listened to this podcast and I want to discuss this with you because I think nap activism might be for me.
Okay. Why don't you, presumably everyone who's listening to this heard the episode less than a week ago. Why don't you go over the ground and then I want to hear why you think it's for you.
Okay. You want me to explain nap? Well, just the name actually is very attractive to me because I love.
Yeah. And I don't know if we'll ever release a video of these things, but it looks like you've recently participated in some nap activism, actually.
Yeah. Not yet. I haven't earned it yet. But I take a nap. I take a nap every day.
Oh, you're doing the nap part, not the activism part.
So if you get the nap part first, I think the logical sequence would be then you get into the activism part. No, okay, enough. To cover the ground of this, I understand it. It's sort of this idea of self-care, taking time to rest when you need it, is a revolutionary act. She uses the example of her daughter, right? So as I remember it from the interview, it relates to kind of their reaction to the Roe v. Wade reversal. And I believe her daughter says something to her about, I just can't. I'm exhausted. I can't muster any response to this. And so she tells her daughter, you don't have to. You rest now and I can keep going. And I'll rest later and you'll pick it up. And to me, this is like just the profound root of community. And there's something else. I love this quote. I think we've even mentioned it on the podcast before, but this line from the Talmud of, you're not obligated to finish the work. Neither are you free to abandon it.
It's incredible.
So much is answered by that.
Yeah.
So much in our compulsion and kind of the ego to be the ones that change the world.
Oh God, it just so perfectly captures the paradox that I'm always wrestling with, that like every moment matters. And yet in this grander sense, like nothing matters. And it's the same at every dimension and every scale.
Great. Exactly. That totally articulates what I'm feeling. So somehow this balance here, you're walking this tightrope between the unbearable lightness of being and the crushing consequences of existence at the same time. And in not just an existential way, but in a very practical, pragmatic way of how to just continue. Does that make sense? That's what I'm receiving from this conversation with Ray. There's something so grounded on it. It's not, and that also I said maybe that's a bigger takeaway for me that I receive because, I probably, like a lot of people in our circle, perhaps some of our listeners, have a certain reaction to kind of mainstream religion. An aversion, let me be specific about my reaction. There's a certain aversion to the dogma and maybe, just the conditioning and the conflict and violence that we've seen sort of unfold in the world behind some of these movements. What I received from Rachel's faith and hearing her talk about the practice of her faith, it has something to do a lot more with just the practical realities of being human and being together with other humans in this project and these ways to keep it going. And in that sense, the religion, the faith, the tradition, all being informed of this. I'll use another example, which is talking about working in this housing facility, and that in the end, they didn't cure poverty. It's not like you got the happy ending of like the Hollywood ending where it's all better, but they found the practical ways to get these certain needs met, and that there was a continuity in this person that picked up the work after her that came from that community. So I think there's so much to be gained, but something else, we talk a lot about in our program in Momentum Lab, this kind of idea of 80% is perfect, or this notion that perfection is the enemy of the good, that there's sort of this kind of just this thing that opens up when we can kind of surrender to the imperfection or the messiness of the process and understand we could just like let ourselves off the hook. It's not going to be complete. We're not going to complete it. We're not going to get to the end of it. We're not going to solve it, but we can make it better.
Oh yeah. So that reminds me of this concept, the stretch zone, that my friend Shilpa always talks about. I'd like to get into it, but could you just say that line from the Talmud one more time?
So what I remember is that you're not obligated to finish the work, neither are you free to abandon it.
God, it's just so good. Like the first half, I have this incredible wave of relaxation go through my body, just this kind of like, oh, I can accept myself for who I am. And the second half, I feel like it's like putting the screws on that it's forcing, it's just like the kind of pressure that a good coach or a teacher that would want to, like I love feeling the pressure of the discipline. I don't know. So the stretch zone is this similar idea where there's kind of 3 zones that are, I was going to say our mind, but I really think it's our whole mind body complex, or like our nervous system can be in. One is called the comfort zone. There's the stretch zone, and there's the panic zone. And the idea is that if you're learning or pushing yourself so hard that you're in the panic zone, that you're really not able to achieve anything. Whether it's like piano or activism in the streets or whatever it is, you're just seeing red. You've lost your higher cognitive function. You're just kind of freaking out. You're like, oh my God, I can't do it. And if you're in the comfort zone, you're not really getting anything done because you're just like comfortable drinking your margaritas by the pool or whatever. And the idea is to like spend a bunch of time, maybe 80% of your time, in the stretch zone where you're a little bit uncomfortable and you're a little bit comfortable, and you can use that whole, let's say, inborn faculty or tendency or gift that I believe we all have as the humans of learning and growing, and able to be like, all right, I'm just going to go deep into my well and pull up these buckets of knowledge that are inside me, but in kind of a casual way, not a panicked way.
I mean, another way to say the learning is kind of adaptation. I don't know if you're familiar with this term eustress, right? Or to kind of put everything you just said in.
Oh, like good, like the Greek for good.
Good stress. Yeah. So it relates to that, like the Greek concept of hormesis, right? Or this kind of adaptive stress, right? And so I think it's going to just kind of repeat what you said, but it's a different vocabulary where you can have hypo stress environment, and that just leads to sort of atrophy, right? We need a certain amount of stimulus. We want that. Like our nervous system, the way we're wired really responds to a certain amount of stress. And you could have distress too, right? Which is like, I think maybe your panic zone, like finding this area kind of right on the curve that's actually going to stimulate some change, some growth. But to be in a level where it's just, now we're just talking trauma. It's like, actually, then it's not, the response isn't adaptive. It's traumatic. You learn kind of maladaptive behaviors from being in that environment too long.
Yeah. And that's so much of what the kind of activist mentality that I spent a lot of years in, which is connected to the news cycle of all the stuff going wrong. It really put me there of just like, now I have information as to every horrible imperialist action that has ever happened and is happening right now without kind of a concurrent power to do anything about it. And it just stressed me out. But the answer is not to, bury my head in the sand and not know about it or pretend it's not happening either. Right. I think those are like, that's the hypo stress environment. Is like, I'll just watch this really awesome show I found on TV for 6 hours a day. And then the hyper or the distress is like, I'm just going to like relentlessly listen to Democracy Now! And just feel my body like, go like, yeah, like there's got to be some medium where we can actually feel good enough to continue making a contribution, which is what I feel like the rabbi really hits.
Yeah, and go back to this phrase, nap activism. So this sort of dichotomy that we've been exploring here, we could call it maybe challenge and support, stress and relaxation. It's kind of like these two sides of this thing. Maybe you can help me extract something here, because I don't know that I have something totally concrete way to explore this. But I see that it's really important. It's something that's come up in our conversations before, which is, I think we phrased it in a recent debrief episode where we're talking about kind of cultivating that bother. Or there needs to be some, you want that, because otherwise there's no impetus to move forward. Right? So to actually like cultivate the bother, but then to support yourself with a good nap, whatever the core practices are, whatever your connections or relationships or activities are. But so quickly that like process of taking care of yourself can just kind of veer into sort of just satisfying these kind of basic pleasures, right? I mean, so yeah, working with this balance of cultivating the bother. I mean, like how many minutes, right? I mean, like, maybe we could actually make this concrete enough that a listener could try this along with me. But like, how many minutes of that type of news should we consume, and how do we balance it out?
I wonder, one thing that comes to mind is people have different tendencies, maybe at different points in their lives. So maybe the first is a self-reflection exercise on what's my tendency in this season of my life. Because in our coaching, like what I love is pushing people in subtle ways, but like everyone needs to be pushed in a different direction. And so like I have clients or friends that are just so, I don't want to use the word obsessive. It's something in that direction, but not quite so strong. Maybe so dedicated to something that I feel like the role of the coach or someone is to push them to like relax a little bit and open up a little bit of space so they can do things more effectively, but not so intensively. And then there's other people where you're just like, all right, I'm gonna push you to like work a little bit harder or think about this a little bit more. And so maybe that's the first step, is like the self-reflection. It's like
Find where you are.
Find where you are. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think like I'm sort of wary of like potential like false binaries, but I think there's definitely a continuum there of like how we're wired, right? And I totally agree with you. See it just perfect examples of this, like in the program with our clients, that there's someone that's just very oriented to be very bothered, and I think that's a great recipe for drive. Our mutual friend Matt, I think this is like one of his greatest qualities, is that he's really irritated by things. I mean, things bother Matt on a level that most people don't even notice. In a sense, and a lot of great musicians I know are like this, right? In a sense, it's that sort of aversion that they've cultivated to not the sound, to the sound that they're not looking for, right? So there's like, and then that's the drive to pursue the sound.
Oh God, there's so much. Yeah, and then there's an interview coming up with Stephanie Lepp. You haven't heard it yet, but you will, and the audience will, and it's amazing. And she talks about, she's like, oh, I have all of this creative anguish. I have so many creative projects. I've got notebooks like filled with them that I haven't created yet, and it's driving me crazy. That drive. It's going to give us all so much, right?
Well, and then so there's all these stories of the artist, the kind of tortured artist, that kind of like that you're on the verge of madness, insanity, or alcoholism. So this is great, actually, because I think that's like, sort of a common perception of that. Maybe I need to be all fucked up and dark and have addictions to be a compelling artist or writer or musician, right? There is that sort of perception somewhere in our popular psyche. And part of it's true, right? Like some obsession there, what did you just say? Like anguish is what produces the great work of art.
Yeah, you got to go deep into the minds, right? You got to go right,
but I think
dark, deep in the minds.
But let's balance it though, because I think what we're saying is that that's perhaps a false dilemma. Someone doesn't need to live a miserable life to produce great work or to keep the work going and create benefit. So that, yeah, I love this anyway. Just to say, I love this idea that the beginning point is to kind of do a self-assessment to see where you are on this continuum. You have a tendency to sort of, mediate gratification, right? That might be a good clue that you can cultivate that quality of bearing the anguish just a little bit more.
Okay, so then so let's say that's the tendency. What's the challenge, or what's the prescription for the person who identifies that tendency? Let's say if it's you, if that's what you come up with,
right.
Then what's the experiment?
So two things are occurring to me. I mean, one thing would be to like seek out the material. Like for you, it was Democracy Now!, right? That was like content that could reliably stimulate your anguish.
Yeah.
So like, I'm just going to sit down for 2 hours. I'm going to hear all about Dick Cheney and I'm just going to sit there. I'm just going to stew. Okay.
Sounds so appealing.
Yeah. And then the other one I think would be probably like noticing where the off gassing, to put it, I don't know, to say like there's like some release valve, right? And often there's like some hedonic set point that we sort of have a tendency to, right? Whatever it is, I mean, comfort food or, whatever, litany of vices we all collect along the way. But that putting it in this term, instead of like kind of going into the wrestling match with the compulsion or whatever that is, but to think of it in terms of, can I bear this feeling, like whatever's coming up, just a little bit longer? So, okay, here's one. My morning coffee. I love coffee so much that as I start getting ready for bed, I get excited that I get to go to bed and wake up and have coffee. So it's really like, it's my special treat. It's my ritual. It's what I look forward to. When I wake up, I'm very happy, not to live my life, not to attack my day, not to see my beautiful wife, but to drink my coffee. So here's what I think I'm going to try to do. I'm going to delay that. At this point, it's very ritualized, it's very compulsive. There's not a question that the first thing after I do a morning meditation, but after that, coffee. I'm going to run an experiment where I hold off. And I don't know if I'm going to consume news. Doesn't sound like the best way to start my day.
This sounds like a terrible idea.
I think what I'll do is write, because I want to write.
Okay.
And writing is kind of an uncomfortable activity, especially getting started in a session. So I'm going to start my day with like an important, like creative burst. Oh, and also there's a guitar practice that would happen before that. So there's quite a few things that would then now start to happen before the thing that I look forward to most. So this little way, but it's not, I'm not saying that I'm going to give it up, right? I think that's the important part of the experiment. I'm not saying no more coffee. That live into the stretch zone a little bit longer. All right, tell me. You're worried that I just will be dysfunctional and won't get anything done.
No, I think it's so hard to find something that we truly love that brings us so much joy.
Yeah.
And I want you to just
have it.
Honor that. You found
okay,
that.
but that's you. Because also, all right, look, now I'm suspecting where you find yourself on the spectrum. Because that's the whole experiment here, right? It's not to kill my joy. It's not to crush my love of coffee. It's to open up some space around that exploration of what is that continuum? How am I satisfying myself? Where can I live in the bother, the irritation, just a little bit more, right? And not in a way that I need to complete it or arrive or be fully formed or perfect, but just in a way that might, I don't know, right? It's just an experiment. We'll see. Maybe I get, I'm like, that was bullshit. Actually, I decided I want 3 cups of coffee right away and I don't want to do shit and I want to spend the rest of the day.
Okay. Well, let's check back in for the next debrief. We'll see how it goes. Yeah.
I can see in your eyes. You have your doubts.
Can I just mention one more thing before we go here?
I would love it. Yeah, please.
So you said a little bit about kind of aversion to religion a few minutes ago. And it just reminded me that maybe something I love about the rabbi and also about Uncle Jamal, who's the first episode of this podcast and a kind of a hero of mine, who are both religious figures, an imam and a rabbi. That I feel like what they're both doing is they're taking, it's almost like I'm much more comfortable with secular humanism than I am with organized religion. Just like, be nice to people. They're taking that kind of core thing of like, let's just like be compassionate. And they're adding all of these great stories to it. And this whole like history of tradition that we as people who love stories and create stories and listen to stories that we need. I think we need it. That's where secular humanism kind of failed me, is that it just like didn't have good enough stories. And so they're taking that whole ethic and they're combining it with these great stories. And they've hopefully, I think, largely left aside all of the other kind of violent colonial baggage that religions often have. It's just like the good values and the good storytelling. And I love that.
That's a wonderful way to kind of gather it all, the threads of your conversation and the conversation we've had today. I think another way I could say that is sort of they both made space for nuance in a way that I think is really it's so easy to lose that. It's so easy to lose that kind of in this reactivity and in the kind of these binaries in black and white thinking or all or nothing thinking. So I think, hopefully what we've done on this debrief is to tease that out a bit, right? And, maybe this coffee experiment is silly or arbitrary or not going to work. But I think the invitation then for the listeners to discover ways where there is a space that you can open up there. There's some space there, whether it's, finding the balance between activism and taking rest, and whether it's stress and restoring, whatever that is, that there's all these, just infinite points along that line where you can find yourself, and you don't have to be at either end. You don't have to complete it. You don't have to walk away from it. And you got to stay with it either way. I mean, you're stuck with yourself. So finding the way, finding the balance, finding the right recipe to keep yourself moving forward and to stay, when possible, in that stretch zone, so that you're continually keeping that eye towards evolution, your own personal evolution, I think, first and foremost. Great. Ankur, thanks so much for this conversation. It's really great. And yeah, I want to thank our listeners too, sticking with us and hanging out with us while we make sense of the world in this way. What a great gift. So thank you all for tuning in, and check us out next time. We're really excited to keep this project going. I'm having a lot of fun with you, Ankur.
Thanks, Nate. That concludes another episode of the 10,000 Heroes Show. Thanks again for listening, and I hope that this has contributed in some small way to your own personal journey of heroism. I'd like to give a shout out to Pierre for the episode artwork, DJ Plainview for the theme music, and to our producer-editor, Martine. This podcast is sponsored by Momentum Lab, our year-long coaching program providing insight, accountability, a community of excellence, and one-on-one support. I encourage anyone who's intrigued to go to whatismomentumlab.com and explore. Finally, I love communication. If this episode has impacted your life in any way, let me know. Our email is info@10kh.show, and there's other ways to contact us in the show notes. Thank you. Have a wonderful day and take care.